League of Legends has been around for over a decade now, and despite the constant ebbing and flowing of meta champions, one of the most consistent options to take advantage of the support role in solo queue right now is a ranged champion with a lot of poke and reliable setup. In the early days of the game, you would picture champions like Sona, Janna, Karma, Lux, and Zyro to take this role. As the seasons would come and go, however, it became evident that this role was a mainstay in solo queue as new champions were released specifically for this playstyle in mind, like Seraphine, Senna, and Yuumi. But we even started seeing champions originally designed for different purposes see small modifications that ended up making them more viable in this role, such as Brand, Heimer, Swain, Vel'Koz, and our main interest for today, Ashe. Obviously a champion originally designed as a marksman, Ashe has seen a lot more focus in the support role for a few reasons that we will touch on throughout this guide. But before we get started, check out the description below and you'll see a quick rundown of the video with timestamps. We'll touch on her identity and what she's meant to bring to the team, how that translates to the support role, why she's better in the support role, and then discuss the best runes, builds, matchups, duo synergies, and some helpful tips to get you started on the right foot going into each stage of the game. Before continuing the video, if you haven't already, please make sure to sub for more content like this. Let's start off with champion identity. Despite being one of the oldest champs in the game, Ashe is one of these champs that has been virtually unchanged, attesting to how well she was originally designed. With a great combination of heavy CC and range, you can already tell she has a recipe that makes her such a reliable pick as a support champion right now. Ashe's passive allows her basic attacks to apply a brief slow to her enemies. In all honesty, when you consider her 600 attack range, this is almost enough on its own to warrant a strong support champion. Having a high range, virtually no cooldown slow makes her incredibly sticky and perfect for setting up ganks. Of course, Ashe's kit is even better than that. Not to mention, her passive also makes her basic attacks against frost enemies deal bonus damage. While her Q, Ranger's Focus, is more useful to her in the marksman's position, it can still be used as a basic attack reset to reapply the passive slow and help poke down enemies in lane. Ashe's W, Volley, is her bread and butter poking ability in the support role. At the time of this video, with her W having a cooldown of 18 seconds at level 1 that quickly drops to 4 seconds at level 5, Ashe can be an absolute nuisance to her enemies. When you consider it's an ability that's virtually impossible to miss, you can quickly see how problematic she can become. The most important thing to consider is your mana conservation here, to ensure that you're not left stranded without the resources to fight your way out. This brings us to her E, Hawkshot. Now, what kind of support would you be without making sure you've got the vision your fellow bot laner is always complaining about? Well, not to worry, because Hawkshot is a free global skill shot that provides vision and at level 1 can be used every 90 seconds, which is more than enough to keep tabs on the enemy jungler and make your jungler's life much easier. Finally, to add to her already immense poking, gank setup, and global presence, Ashe's ultimate ability, Enchanted Crystal Arrow, is the cherry on top here. It's another global skill shot that stuns the first champion hit for up to 3.5 seconds depending on the distance traveled, and has a starting cooldown of just 80 seconds, making it one of the biggest strengths of Ashe support here. When we say there's truly no escaping this champion, there really isn't as long as the player is piloting her well. It's this combination of range and utility that makes us question why Ashe is actually an AD carry. Arguably, it's much better to split the tasks of utility and DPS between Ashe and another marksman that's drafted more custom to the situations of the game. Now that we understand why she's so much more prevalent in the support role right now, let's get you set up to start dominating your solo queue ladder with this pick, starting with your rune options. There's two camps when it comes to the runes to use on support Ashe. One is far more utilized and much more valuable, but we will cover both to let you decide what you prefer. The first is the Halo Blade setup with Cheap Shot, Zombie Ward, and Ultimate Hunter for the domination tree, with Biscuit Delivery and Approach Velocity for the inspiration tree secondary. This setup provides the full package of synergy that you'd be looking for in Ashe support. When Hop activates, Ashe is virtually guaranteed 3 basic attacks onto a target and therefore can easily stack and activate her Ranger's Focus for several seconds worth of that passive slow and high DPS. With such a low cooldown, this is a great window for trading in lane and can easily result in the enemy burning a summoner spell if they're not really careful. Cheap Shot aids in the damage output after she initially impairs an enemy's movement with her first basic attack. This means that the same 3 basic attack trade at level 1 will deal an additional 20 true damage. And let's not forget the added free gold that you get from every auto thanks to items like Spectral Sickle. Zombie Ward is a fantastic choice to increase her vision control as a support and stack up a bit more damage along the way. Finally, Ultimate Hunter allows Ashe to dramatically lower her Enchanted Crystal Arrow cooldown by up to 31 Ability Haste. This means that without any additional Ability Haste at max stacks, her ultimate is up every 41 seconds. This secondary option for a rune page is meant for more of a cheesier style with a focus on more poke. This option is Arcane Comet, Mana Flow Band, Transcendence, and Scorch with Cheap Shot and Ultimate Hunter. Obviously with this setup, you still get the value of Cheap Shot and Ultimate Hunter, but you are more reliant on poking enemies just with your volley than also just using your basic attacks with trades. Something that's interesting is actually with summoner spells on Ashe, because it's actually important to understand what the function of each one does. Her standard take is actually with Flash and Ghost, which is not very common on a support champion. The reason for this is because this actually enables a ton of early pressure for Ashe, especially in levels 1 through 3, because of her movement speed delta with her passive. And if she pops Ghost immediately, starts autoing people down with her consistent slow and being able to keep up with Ghost, she can usually actually burn a Flash because she's constantly just locking down this opponent and allowing your team to actually catch up to them. An alternative option to this is actually taking heal if you're playing more defensive at times, because not every matchup is going to be as safe. So this is something to keep in mind. Now let's move on to builds. The standard build that Ashe support wants to use use is actually to start with Spectral Sickle, and then rush your Umbral Glaive and your boots, in this case being Ionian Boots of Lucidity almost every time. Umbral Glaive is a high priority item because of the tremendous value it provides in vision control. Not only does this make clearing enemy vision easier and provide more damage, but the extra gold generation helps Ashe translate into the rest of her core items here as well. Having Umbral Glaive finish while still in the laning phase emphasizes Ashe's strengths and helps snowball her advantages for the Imperial Mandate, which then helps enhance teammate damage as well. After these two items and boots are complete, Ashe will actually already have 55 ability haste without taking her runes into account. To finish off the build, Ashe should then prioritize items like Chempunk Chainsword if the situation arises where the enemy has tremendous healing value. In this situation, this 4-item core will net Ashe 70 ability haste without runes. Of course, with Ultimate Hunter, that could be as high as 101 ability haste on her ultimate, cutting the base cooldown pretty much in half. If Chempunk Chainsword is unnecessary, items like Axiom Arc or any other situational defensive item would also be ideal. It's also worth noting that with Axiom Arc, however, Ashe's ultimate ability haste would exceed 125 and would get the reduction out of every kill as well. Regardless of the options you work with, your final item should probably be a Watchful Ward Stone, just because it's such a high value item for supports this late in the game. Now that we know what to build, let's discuss some important matchups. Ashe's best matchups are into champions that are meant to poke and make short trades, but simply don't have enough range to compete. So champions like Swain, Brand, MF, Seraphine, Morgana, few popular examples here. In these matchups, the most important thing is to actually make sure that you got some Happy Feet to dodge those key catching abilities. If you manage to get caught, you're still pretty much an AD carry in the early game, so you're practically as good as dead. Ashe's worst matchups are probably into champions that have a lot of kill pressure in the early game. Things like Nautilus or Leona and things like that. Once they get buffed in as of 13.3, it's going to be a little bit harder for her to survive since she has no escape and she does not have the highest level of durability, right? So proper positioning and being able to zone them out is going to be very important. Touching on duo synergies, Ashe's early strength is on her punishing and long range poke. This makes her best paired with marksman champions like Jhin, Twitch, Xayah, or Varus, or even mage bot lanes like Karthus, Seraphine, and Ziggs. All these marksmen and mages can play aggressively to follow up on Ashe's slows and punish missteps, while also having the range to capitalize on Ashe's poke from most places in lane. Now let's move on to some tips and tricks, starting with the early game. In the early game, it's actually quite easy to get carried away and start spamming your volley. The problem with this is that you just don't have enough mana to do that reliably. This is why Halo Blades options are generally more reliable, because the trade is still technically from range and doesn't really demolish your mana bar. This combination will provide the most value in this stage of the game. The ideal trade would activate your hub, stacking Ranger's focus, and then activating that for added DPS and taking advantage of Ashe's passive. If you feel that you're not poking enough while Halo Blades is on cooldown, you can always toss a volley and follow up with a basic attack activating Ashe's passive for some added damage and a quicker trade. Remember that your Hawkshot is actually free to use and you can only hold up to 2 charges at once. You should always be cycling Hawkshot so you don't have both charges sitting in your inventory for a while. It's just much more valuable to have that information, determine what the enemy jungler is going to do for the next 90 seconds, send out the next one, and then repeat the cycle effectively forever. In the mid game, the best use of Ashe is to start influencing other lanes at this point. Whenever you recall, you should be looking to set up a play with your Enchanted Crystal Arrow because it's just far too useful and powerful to be not using whenever it's up. This ability is incredibly powerful for picks, which is a fantastic way to leverage a kill into a free dragon or herald right before they spawn. In the final stages of the game, Ashe has more ability haste than pretty much any other champion will ever have. In the late game, the most important thing is to stay alive so you can use those impactful abilities whenever needed. This means using Hawkshot to check on enemy locations and see if you can catch someone rotating to or from objectives, and using your ultimate to capitalize on those mispositioning enemies. Overall, Ashe is an incredible support champion right now because of her high value, low risk, global utility, and just overloaded kit when you think about it. If you're hoping to capitalize on this utility to lead your team to victory, make sure you keep this video on standby for reference. If you're still not convinced on how strong Ashe support is, I would highly recommend you give it a try and let us know how you did. Either way, I hope this guide has helped you out, and I will see you in the next one. Stay fresh.